the Royal Enfield Bear 650, a new bike from the classic British brand that's owned and run from India and inspired by the desert racing scene of California in the 1960s. Feeling a little bit confused? Trust me, it all makes sense as soon as you swing your leg over the saddle of this great looking new scrambler.
In this video, I'll tell you everything you need to know from attending the bike's international press launch in California. And by the end, I would have answered these 3 questions. Can this cut-price retro motorcycle hold its own against some seriously stiff competition? Is it a scrambler in name only, or does it have some off-road chops? And most importantly, is it a bike deserving of your hard-earned cash?
Now there's a story behind this bike, and it began in 1960 at the Big Bear Run, a California desert race. Over 700 people took part, including a 16-year-old lad called Eddie Mulder. Now Eddie was on a Royal Enfield motorcycle, and he actually started last because just before the start gun he needed a poo and couldn't wait. Over the next 150 miles of hardcore desert racing, he passed more than 700 competitors to come home first, a hero in his desert town. Now, over the years, Eddie became a racer and a stunt rider, and he was here in Palm Springs last night to tell us about his life story. Because it is Eddie that inspired this cracking looking bike behind me. And boy, what a machine it is. So what have we been up to? Well, today we've done about 150 miles in a big loop from Palm Springs up into the mountains, through the desert and back again. Now this may look very green and pleasant, almost like the UK, but no, it has been an arid desert ride, the perfect place to test ride this bike, a bike that was inspired by desert racing. So how did it perform?
It's gotta be against the law to look this damn good. Cause baby, I feel real good and I wish I would. It's gotta be against the law to look this damn good.
Now, talking to the guys and girls from Royal Enfield last night, they said about 2/3 of this bike is new compared to the machine it's based on, the Interceptor 650. So what is new? If you're a fan of the Interceptor, well, we have a bench scrambler seat, we have a wider bar, we have a 19-inch front wheel that's spoked, knobblier tyres, the footpegs have been moved further forward and a little bit down, and we have more suspension travel. Suspension travel at the front is 130 millimeters, and at the rear that twin shock gives you 115 millimeters. Now let's talk about that suspension, because Royal Enfield are quite proud of it. It's Showa setup, and that is a step forward for Royal Enfield, and seeing those Showa forks does give you confidence that this is a quality piece of machinery. Royal Enfield has also changed the pillion foot pegs to make them a little bit more comfortable for your pillion. They brought them forward a little bit, and that has allowed them to also make better use of the space for luggage. And I saw a bike today with some cracking soft luggage on the back. Lots of room, easy to slip on and off. It looks like it's going to be very easy to turn this bike into something that can cover big distances in comfort, if you're into that classic style of bike. Let's start with the engine. Now it's a parallel twin that makes 47 brake horsepower at 7,150 RPM and 57 Newton meters of torque at 5,150 RPM. It's based very heavily on the Royal Enfield Interceptor, and it uses the same engine, but it has had a few tweaks, including setting up a 2-in-1 exhaust, which means they've managed to squeeze a little bit more power out of it. How did that engine perform? It is lovely. It's torquey, it's rambunctious, it's got a lovely growl. And there's plenty of power throughout the rev range. Now, being a 650 and only producing 47 brake horsepower, I did find myself on the throttle stop when I rode the bike very hard or when I was pushing it fast on the motorway. But bear in mind, this is a scrambler. It's not designed to hoon all day and carve canyons or country roads in the Cotswolds. It's a bike to sit back, relax and enjoy the world on. And that engine is the perfect accompaniment to it. The bike handles very well. It's neutral, it's not particularly nimble or agile, but it's also not heavy. It's what you would expect from a bike like this. That 19-inch front wheel does slow down the steering a little bit, but once I got a little bit of confidence in the tyres and got used to the bike, I was able to knock into the counter steer and really enjoy carving through, well, the mountains and the canyons of California. It's certainly an easy bike to jump on and ride relatively fast straight away. Bear in mind this bike costs just under £7,000 depending on the colourway you go for, and that is reflected a little in the way the suspension performs. It's not the plushest, it's not the type of setup you'll get on a £20,000 adventure bike, and so it shouldn't be. The ride is quite firm, and when I was pushing it through the twisties and I came across some lumps and bumps, it did affect the handling quite substantially. But again, bear in mind that price point. And actually for lazy cruising and then getting a little bit of a hustle on as well on the bike, it performed well enough. The bike certainly wasn't lacking. It's just if you own a GS, a Multistrada or a bike like that, you will notice the suspension is slightly more rudimentary. Jumping on this bike, I was expecting the upright riding position of the Royal Enfield Himalayan 450, a bike I'm a big fan of and I've been riding this year. You are actually pitched slightly further forward on the Bear 650, but once I got used to it, it is a comfortable position to be in. And actually for the type of riding we were doing today, which was fairly spirited on some fantastic twisty roads, being slightly further leant forward was a good thing. There's a nice natural reach to the bars though, plenty of leg room, and the saddle is relatively comfortable. It's nice and firm, and I like a firm saddle because it means I can move my backside around without getting numb and being stuck in one position. I would quite happily spend a few hours on this bike in comfort, exploring the world. Let's take a look at this bike, because the retro scrambler segment is all about looks. It's not about off-road performance. And boy, this is one fantastic looking machine. It's got the classic looks of a Royal Enfield. I love that beautiful teardrop tank. All the paint schemes look incredible. And I really do enjoy this 2-in-1 exhaust. You can tell from a first glance that this isn't a hardcore off-road dirt bike. It's not designed to do that, but what you have is a fantastically styled scrambler that will turn heads anywhere you go. I love the attention to detail. Little things like the cap here with the Bear 650. You have got a lovely looking filler clap. The handlebar has got this scrambler style to it, and one of my favorite things is this TFT display. Now, call me a bit of an old bastard, but I love an analog dial. In fact, I would put them on my walls at home. Royal Enfield has come up with something of a compromise, and you have this beautiful round TFT dial. It's chromed around the outside, and at first glance, it actually could look like an analog dial. It's a thing of beauty, one of my favourite TFT screens on any bike. It's easy to read, there's a rev counter, gear position indicator, speed indicator, everything you need is there. So top marks to Royal Enfield for making this whole cockpit feel a wonderful place to be. It feels relatively premium for a bike that, in the grand scheme of things, is something of a bargain. Let's talk about the brakes. Single disc up front, single at the rear, not massive amounts of stopping power, but more than adequate to stop this bike. I would have preferred a little bit more initial bite, but as soon as you lean on those brakes, you've got plenty of stopping power, especially if, like me, you use a little bit of front and rear most of the time together.
As bin as the Bear 650 is a scrambler inspired by a desert race, we had to test its trail riding credentials. So we turned off the highway onto a sandy and rocky trail, and it only took a couple of 100 yards or so for my front wheel to almost wash out in a sandy section. Thankfully, my pride remained intact and I stayed upright, but the experience didn't give me the greatest confidence in the MRF tyres. Despite the early wobble, the Bear 650 was more than capable of tackling the easygoing desert terrain, and it carried its 214 kilogram wet weight very well. And that's admirable for a bike that, if we're being honest, is more scrambler in style than in substance. But the standing position felt natural and relaxed, with the foot pegs sensibly located and wide enough to provide a stable platform. Although you wouldn't need to ride too much harder for the suspension to find its limitations. But if you treat the bike like the stylish soft-roader it is, rather than trying to ride it like an enduro weapon, it'll be a fun accomplice on light green lanes and gravel roads back home.
Let's talk about value for money, and this is really where the Bear 650 hits the mark. Boy, a bike as capable and as good looking as this for a smidging under 7,000 represents incredible value for money. Buying a Royal Enfield in the past, you might have done it because you couldn't afford perhaps a motorcycle from a more premium brand, or you might have done it just because you had a Royal Enfield back in the day and you wanted to keep that love affair going. Both are good reasons to buy a motorcycle, but don't necessarily have to be the case with this machine, because in the Bear 650, Royal Enfield has produced a gorgeous looking, strong performing, hugely enjoyable motorcycle to get your kicks on.
It may be the love child of British heritage, Indian business acumen and American dreams, but there's nothing confusing about the Bear 650.
One thing I really enjoy is how much it lacks. I know it sounds stupid, but I don't have semi-active suspension, I don't have radar adaptive cruise control, I don't have engine modes. And these are all wonderful pieces of technology that feel great on the right machine. But boy, it feels good just to swing your leg over a bike, open up the throttle and be in control. Feel the road beneath you, feel the wind in your face, and have a thoroughly enjoyable time on a motorcycle.
I admit I ended up bonding with the Bear 650 during the brief time we had together. It's an authentic retro scrambler that's as rich in character as it is in style, and I'm genuinely thinking about adding one to my garage. Praise doesn't come much higher than that.
Thank you for watching. Please do subscribe to the channel. I'll see you next time.
You can test ride all the latest adventure and touring bikes at the 2025 ABR Festival. If you're looking to buy a new motorcycle, there's nowhere better to compare and contrast bikes from the world's leading manufacturers. Head over to www.abrfestival.com to get your tickets.